In the end, he took everything. Or so he thought. What Mark discovered months later would unravel him. But what I found in the forgotten stone cottage my father hid in the deed, that wasn't just about revenge. It was about rescue. If you've ever felt like you've lost it all, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. We're building a community here for people who know what it's like to have to start over from nothing. The key to the apartment felt wrong in my hand. For 2 years, it had been a familiar weight in my pocket, a simple tool that meant I was home. Now it felt like a foreign object, cold and sharp-edged, a piece of a life that no longer belonged to me. I stood in the hallway, the door ajar, listening to the hollow echo of the empty rooms. Every piece of furniture we'd picked out together, every rug, every lamp, was gone. His movers had been efficient, clinical. They had a list, and on that list was everything of value. The minimalist leather sofa, the Scandinavian dining set, the art prints I'd loved that he'd always called derivative. All of it, loaded into a truck and driven away to his new life in a high-rise across town. I was left with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and a settlement check that barely covered my lawyer's final bill. He got the assets. I got my freedom. That's what my lawyer, Ms. Albright, had called it. It felt less like freedom and more like being jettisoned into the cold vacuum of space. Mark was in the kitchen, wiping down the marble countertop with a microfiber cloth. He was always cleaning, always erasing any sign of life, of mess. It was one of the first things I'd found charming about him. It was one of the last things I found suffocating. He didn't look at me. The keys, Clara? His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth it once held, the warmth that had convinced me he was my future. It was the voice of a business transaction being concluded. I walked over and placed the key on the gleaming counter. It made a small, pathetic clink. He picked it up immediately, as if my touch might tarnish it. "Thank you," he said, his eyes scanning the room, checking for any last vestige of me he might have missed. A stray hairpin, a forgotten scarf. He wanted a clean slate, an erasure. For a moment, I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage and throw something against the pristine white walls. I wanted to tell him that you can't wipe away 2 years of a life with a cleaning cloth. But the fight had gone out of me months ago, worn down by depositions and legal threats, and the slow, chilling realization that the man I married viewed our life together as a portfolio of assets to be liquidated. So I just nodded. My throat felt tight, a knot of unshed tears I refused to let him see. "Goodbye, Mark." He finally met my gaze, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something, regret, pity, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that cool, impenetrable mask. "Be well, Clara," he said. It sounded like a dismissal. I turned and walked out of the apartment, out of the building, out onto the noisy city street, without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound of absolute finality. I was 24 years old, and I had nowhere to go. My appointment with Ms. Albright was at 3. Her office was in a stuffy, overheated building downtown, filled with the scent of old paper and bitter coffee. She was a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut, a port in the storm of my divorce. She'd fought for me, but Mark's lawyers had been sharks, and we were outmatched from the start. "Clara," she said, gesturing for me to sit. Her desk was an organized chaos of files and legal pads. "I have the final paperwork for you to sign." I sat, my hands clenched in my lap, and watched as she pushed a stack of papers toward me. I signed where she indicated, my signature looking shaky and unfamiliar. It was done. Really, truly done. "Now," she said, leaning back in her chair. "There is one last thing. A bit of an oddity, really." She pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope from a different file. "This is from your father's estate. It was processed years ago, of course, but there was a quitclaim deed that was bundled in with some other land parcels he sold off before he passed. Mark's lawyers audited everything, of course. They assessed the main properties, the investments, the accounts. But this they missed." She slid the deed across the desk. It was old, the paper soft and fragile at the creases. My father's name, Thomas Miller, was written in his familiar, strong script. And below it, my name, Clara Miller. The property description was vague. Lot 7, Black Creek Township. One stone structure. I looked at her, confused. "I don't understand. What is this?" Ms. Albright gave me a small, weary smile. "It's a cottage, Clara. A tiny one, apparently. According to the county records, It's on a 2-acre plot of land about 3 hours north of here. It has no listed market value because it's been off the grid for decades. No utilities, no recent survey. To Mark's legal team, it was a rounding error, a worthless, undeveloped parcel attached to a larger sale. They didn't even bother to investigate it. Your father transferred it solely into your name on your 18th birthday. A quiet little transaction that slipped through the cracks. My father had passed away 3 years ago, a sudden heart attack that had shattered my world long before Mark ever had the chance. He was a quiet man, a builder, with hands that were always calloused and a scent of sawdust that clung to his clothes. He'd never mentioned a cottage. Why would he do that? I whispered, tracing his signature with my fingertip. Why wouldn't he tell me? Ms. Albright sighed. I don't know, dear. But he did. And it's yours. Free and clear. It's not much, by the sounds of it. The tax assessment is negligible. But it's something. It's a place. The words hung in the air. I had 2 suitcases, a box of books, and a dwindling bank account. What I didn't have was a place. I looked down at the deed, this ghost of a gift from a man I still missed every single day. 1 stone structure. It was more than I'd had 5 minutes ago. How do I get there? I asked, my voice a little stronger now. Ms. Albright's smile widened. She pushed a hand-drawn map across the desk, tucked inside the envelope with the deed. Your father, it seems, thought of everything. The bus ride was long and quiet, a slow crawl out of the city's concrete heart into the green, breathing lungs of the countryside. I watched the skyscrapers shrink in the window until they were just jagged teeth on the horizon, then disappear completely, replaced by rolling hills and wide-open skies. Each mile that passed felt like a layer of the last 2 years being peeled away. The tension in my shoulders eased. The knot in my stomach loosened. I was running away, I suppose. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was running towards something, not just from it. The bus dropped me off in a town called Havenwood. It was little more than a crossroads with a gas station, a diner, and a general store. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, a clean, sharp scent that was a world away from the city's exhaust fumes. According to my father's map, the cottage was another 2 miles down a secondary road. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just my own 2 feet. I hoisted my suitcase, settled the strap of my duffel bag on my shoulder, and started walking. The road was quiet, flanked by dense woods. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of leaves, dappling the asphalt in shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was peaceful, but an unnerving kind of peaceful. I was utterly alone. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A narrow, overgrown dirt track branching off from the main road, almost completely hidden by overgrown bushes. A rusted metal gate hung crookedly on one hinge, barred by a thick, corroded chain and a heavy padlock. This was it. I dropped my bags and pulled the key from the envelope Miss Albright had given me. It was a big, old-fashioned skeleton key, heavy and ornate. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. I threaded my hand through the gate and fit the key into the lock. It was stiff with rust, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. I put all my weight into it, gritting my teeth, and with a groan of protest, the lock clicked open. The chain fell away. I pushed the gate open. It shrieked in protest, the sound loud in the quiet woods. The track beyond was more of a suggestion than a path, 2 faint ruts in a sea of weeds and wildflowers. I dragged my suitcase behind me, the little wheels catching on rocks and roots. The air grew cooler as I walked deeper into the trees. And then I saw it. The cottage was nestled in a small clearing, exactly as the deed had described it. 1 stone structure. It looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. The walls were made of large, rounded river stones of varying shades of gray and brown, held together with crumbling mortar where moss and tiny ferns had taken root. The roof was slate, and a few of the tiles were missing, leaving dark, gaping holes. A single stone chimney stood sentinel at one end, covered in ivy. The windows were small and dark, their panes clouded with years of grime. A heavy wooden door, its blue paint faded and peeling, was the only feature on the front wall. It was small, sturdy, and looked impossibly old. It was also, I realized with a sinking heart, a complete and utter ruin. Mark's lawyers hadn't missed anything of value. They'd just correctly assessed that this was worthless. I sank down onto my suitcase, the fight-or-flight energy that had carried me this far draining away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness. What was I thinking? I couldn't live here. This wasn't a home. It was a glorified pile of rocks. The silence of the woods pressed in on me, and for the first time since I'd walked out of that apartment, I felt the full weight of my solitude. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a ruined cottage and no plan. The tears I'd held back for so long finally came, hot and silent, tracing paths through the dust on my cheeks. I cried for my failed marriage. I cried for the life I'd thought I was building. I cried for my father, for the loss of him that still felt as raw as it had 3 years ago. And I cried for the foolish, desperate hope that had brought me here, to this wreck of a place that felt like a perfect metaphor for my life. After a while, the tears subsided, leaving me feeling hollowed out and strangely calm. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees, and the air was growing chilly. Sitting here and feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to get me anywhere. I stood up, wiped my face on my sleeve, and walked to the door. There was another lock, this one set into the wood itself. A second, smaller skeleton key on the same ring fit perfectly. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into a single, dark room. The air that rushed out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of damp earth and decaying wood, and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried herbs. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a scene straight from a forgotten story. The room was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet. A huge stone fireplace dominated one wall, big enough to stand in, with a heavy wooden mantelpiece above it. The floor was made of wide, rough-hewn wooden planks, coated in a thick layer of dust and leaves that had blown in through the broken window panes. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. A narrow cot with a rotted mattress was pushed against the far wall. In one corner, there was a small kitchenette set up, a dry sink with a hand pump, a few bare wooden shelves, and a small, rusted wood-burning stove. It was Spartan, primitive, but it was solid. The stone walls were thick and impassive. The heavy beams in the ceiling looked sound. This place had been built to last. It hadn't been cared for, but it hadn't fallen down. My flashlight beam caught something on the mantelpiece. It was a small, tin box, the kind that old-fashioned biscuits used to come in, decorated with a faded painting of a clipper ship. It was the only object in the room that seemed deliberately placed. I walked over, my footsteps stirring up clouds of dust. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon and a small, leather-bound journal. On top of the letters was a single, folded piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was my father's handwriting. For Clara. When you need it most, my breath hitched. He had known. Somehow, he had known that a day would come when I would be lost, and he had left me a map. Not just the map to this place, but something more. I sat down at the dusty table, the flashlight propped up to provide a pool of light, and I began to read. The first letter was dated on my 18th birthday, the day he'd legally signed the cottage over to me. My dearest Clara, it began. If you are reading this, it means you have found your way to the cornerstone. That's what I've always called this place. Not because it's grand, but because it's the first thing, the solid thing, you can build a life on. I hope you've found it in a time of peace, that you've come here for a quiet weekend away from whatever wonderful life you are building for yourself. But I am a practical man, and I know that life doesn't always go according to plan. I suspect you may have found this place because you needed it. Because you needed a foundation when the one you were standing on crumbled. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring. He saw me so clearly, even from across the years. He knew my vulnerabilities, my tendency to trust too easily, to build my house on sand. I took a deep breath and continued. I built this cottage with my own 2 hands, the summer I was 19. My father, your grandfather, had just died, and I felt adrift. I bought this little patch of forgotten land with the last of his inheritance money. People told me I was a fool, that I should have invested it, gone to college. But I needed to build something. I needed to put rocks on top of other rocks and prove that something could last. I lived here for 2 years. It taught me how to be quiet. It taught me how to be self-reliant. It taught me the difference between what you want and what you need. It's where I was living when I met your mother. He wrote about meeting my mom at a town dance in Havenwood, about how he'd courted her, how he'd brought her here on picnics. He wrote about leaving this place behind when they moved to the city to build their life together, but how he never sold it. It was his anchor, he said, a secret touchstone to the young man he had been. I am giving it to you for the same reason, Clara. Not as an investment, not as a property to be flipped. I am giving you a place to be quiet, a place to be self-reliant, a place to figure out the difference between what you want and what you need. I hid it from you, and I hid it from the world, because things that are precious are often fragile. I didn't want it to get tangled up in the noise of life, in mortgages, or taxes, or legal disputes. I wanted it to remain pure, a refuge. If you are here because you are hurt, let this place heal you. The stones are good listeners. The woods don't judge. The silence is a balm, the letter went on, filled with practical advice. Where the well pump drew from. How to patch the slate roof. Which floorboard in the corner was loose. He'd left a small stash of emergency cash and some tools hidden beneath it. He ended the letter with a simple line. This house is not an inheritance, Clara. It's a beginning. What you build from it is up to you. All my love, Dad. I sat in the deepening twilight, the single beam of my phone's flashlight a small circle of warmth in the cold, dusty room. The silence was no longer menacing. It felt watchful, protective. My father's presence was so strong in this little room. It was as if he were sitting in the chair across from me. I could almost smell the sawdust on his clothes. I got up and walked to the corner he'd described. The floorboards were wide and dark with age. I ran my hand over them until I found it. One that had the slightest give to it. Using the tip of the old key, I managed to pry it up. And there, in the dark space beneath, was a metal box. Inside was exactly what he'd promised. A small hand crank drill, a hammer, a box of nails. And beneath them, a stack of cash, bound with a rubber band. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I had to my name. It was enough. Enough to buy food, to get some supplies, to start. I put the floorboard back in place and stood up, looking around the small, dark room. It wasn't a ruin. It was a project. It wasn't an ending. It was, as he'd said, a beginning. The grief and despair that had clung to me like a shroud began to recede, replaced by a tiny, fragile flicker of something else. It felt like determination. That night, I didn't sleep on the rotted cot. I took the cushions from the chairs, laid my coat on the floor in front of the cold fireplace, and curled up there. I felt safer than I had in years. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birdsong. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room looked different in the daylight. Less haunted, more waiting. I made a list in the back of my father's journal. First, water. I went to the hand pump at the sink and worked the handle. For a long time, nothing happened but a dry, asthmatic wheezing. My shoulders began to ache. I was about to give up when I heard a gurgle deep in the pipes, and then, with a shudder, a trickle of rusty water sputtered from the spout. I kept pumping, and the water slowly cleared, until it ran cool and clean. I drank straight from my cupped hands. It was the best water I had ever tasted. Next, I explored the rest of the property. The 2 acres were mostly wild woodland, thick with oak and maple trees. Behind the cottage, I found a small, collapsed shed and the remnants of a vegetable garden, now completely overgrown with weeds. But the stone walls of the garden were still there. Another project. Another piece of the future. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. I swept the floors, pulling up years of dirt and leaves. I scrubbed the window panes until the light could pour in, clear and bright. I dragged the rotted mattress outside, leaving the simple wooden frame of the cot. Every task was simple, physical, and deeply satisfying. Each sweep of the broom, each bucket of clean water, was an act of reclamation. I wasn't just cleaning a cottage. I was clearing out the wreckage of my own life. I was making space. Now, I want to pause here for a second, because maybe this part of the story is hitting you in a specific way. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you're at absolute zero, where everything has been taken from you, and you realize that the only way out is to build? Not with a grand plan, not with a lot of money, but just with your own 2 hands, one small, tedious, necessary task at a time. Sweeping a floor, pumping water, making a list. If you know that feeling, if you've lived that moment, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. This community is for people who understand that sometimes the biggest victories are the quietest ones. It's about finding that one loose floorboard, that one hidden thing that tells you it's not over. Okay, let's get back to the story. That first week was a blur of hard work. I walked into Havenwood and used some of the cash to buy basic supplies. Buckets, cleaning fluids, a new mattress for the cot, and simple food that didn't require refrigeration: oats, dried beans, coffee. The man at the general store, a grizzled old-timer named George, gave me a curious look. "You're staying out at the old Miller place?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded. "Just for a little while," he grunted. "That place ain't been lived in for 30 years. Your father, Tom, he was a good man. Built that place himself. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man." News traveled fast in a town this small. I learned to embrace the curiosity. It wasn't malicious, just local. These were people who noticed things. After a week of cleaning, the inside of the cottage was transformed. It was still rustic, still bare, but it was clean. It was mine. I tackled the roof next. I found a long, sturdy ladder in the collapsed shed and spent 2 days carefully climbing up and replacing the broken slates with ones I'd salvaged from the shed's own roof. It was terrifying work. The roof was steep, and I was acutely aware of how alone I was. If I fell, no one would find me for days. But with each slate I set in place, I felt a surge of pride. I was fixing what was broken. I was making my shelter whole. One afternoon, as I was weeding the overgrown garden, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up to the gate. My heart hammered against my ribs. City cars meant city problems. A man in a tailored suit got out. He was tall, with a confident, predatory stillness that I recognized instantly. A lawyer. He walked to the gate, his expensive shoes crunching on the dirt track. "Clara," he said. It wasn't a question. "My name is Jonathan Decker. I represent Mark." I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, my body tensing for a fight. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "He was surprised to learn you'd taken up residence here," Decker said, a faint, condescending smile on his lips. "Frankly, we were all surprised this asset was overlooked. An oversight on our part, an asset." He called my home an asset. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "Mark is prepared to be generous," he said, pulling a thick envelope from his breast pocket. "He's offering you $20,000 for your interest in the property. A quick claim transfer. You sign the paper, you walk away with enough to get a fresh start somewhere else. Somewhere more suitable." He made it sound like a favor. But I knew Mark. This wasn't generosity. This was a threat wrapped in a cashier's check. He wanted this loose and tied up. He wanted to own everything, to possess the last piece of my old life that he'd failed to claim. $20,000. A month ago, that would have sounded like a lottery win. It would have been a lifeline I would have grabbed without a second thought. But standing there, on the land my father had saved for me, in the shadow of the house I was slowly bringing back to life, it felt like an insult. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt as solid as the stones in the cottage wall. Decker's smile tightened. "Perhaps you're not understanding the situation, Clara. This property is landlocked, has no utilities, and is practically derelict. The offer is more than fair. It's charitable. The answer is no," I repeated. "Please leave, for a moment." He looked like he was going to argue, to push his way through the gate. But something in my eyes must have stopped him. He gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. "Mark isn't a patient man. The offer is on the table for 48 hours. I suggest you reconsider." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust that slowly settled over the quiet woods. I stood there for a long time, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with rage. An asset, a nuisance. He still saw me as a problem to be managed, a line item on a balance sheet. The rage burned away the last of my fear. This was no longer just about survival. It was about standing my ground. That night, I couldn't sleep. Decker's words echoed in my head. Why were they so interested? $20,000 wasn't charity. It was a strategic expense. Mark wasn't sentimental. If he wanted this place, there was a reason. A financial reason. I took out the tin box again, pulling out the small leather-bound journal. I'd only glanced at it before, assuming it was my father's diary. But as I opened it under the light of my new kerosene lamp, I saw that it wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. The first few pages were filled with my father's neat columns of figures, detailing the costs of building the cottage, bags of mortar, board feet of lumber, the price of the land itself. But the rest of the journal was different. It was filled with notes, geological survey clippings, and hand-drawn maps of the property and the surrounding area. My father had been researching this land for years. He'd made notes about water tables, soil composition, and something he called the granite shelf. Tucked into the back of the journal was a final letter in a sealed envelope. It was addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Clara, it began, his script a little shakier this time, dated only a few months before he died. If you are reading this second letter, it means the world has come knocking at your door, and not in a friendly way. I had hoped you would never need this information, that the cottage would be nothing more to you than a quiet place. But I knew there was a chance its other secret would come out one day. The secret is not in the cottage, my girl. It's under it. This land sits on a massive deposit of high-quality granite. The kind they use for architectural finishes, for countertops in fancy city apartments, for corporate lobbies. It's worth a fortune. I found out about it by accident, years ago, when a geology student was surveying the area. I bought the surrounding parcels of land cheap, and then sold them off over the years, making sure the deed for the cottage and its 2 acres was always kept separate, always legally distinct, always protected. I knew that if a big corporation ever came to develop the area, they would need this central plot to make their quarry operation viable. It's the key to the whole deposit. My blood ran cold. I looked around the little stone room, at the floorboards I had swept, the walls that had sheltered me. I wasn't living in a cottage. I was living on top of a gold mine. A development company has been buying up land in this county for years, the letter continued. Quietly, through shell corporations. I've been tracking them. They're called Northwood Holdings. They are patient. They are ruthless. And I have a strong suspicion that the man you married, Mark, has connections to them. I never liked him, Clara. I saw the way he looked at things, not with love, but with an appraiser's eye. I tried to warn you, in my own quiet way, but you were in love. And I wanted you to be happy. So I did the only thing I could think of. I built you a fortress, disguised as a ruin. I made sure this one thing, this cornerstone, was so well hidden in the legal paperwork that it would take a forensic accountant to find it. I was betting that his greed would have a blind spot, that he would overlook something that didn't have an obvious, immediate price tag, Northwood Holdings. Mark had mentioned them. He'd been consulting on a new rural logistics project for them. It wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't just stumbled upon this. After the divorce was final, he must have gone back through the paperwork, looking for any unturned stones, and found this one. He hadn't missed it. He'd just found it too late. And now he wanted it back. My father's letter concluded with a warning and a choice. They will try to bully you, Clara. They will offer you a pittance, tell you it's worthless, threaten you with legal fees until you break. They are counting on you not knowing what you are standing on. You have 2 choices. You can sell, take the money, and build a life somewhere else, far away from all this. There is no shame in that. Or you can fight. You can hold on to this place. Not for the money, but for the principle. They cannot get to the granite without your 2 acres. You hold the key. The choice, my love, is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. Know that I love you. Your father. I lowered the letter, my mind reeling. The $20,000 offer wasn't just an insult. It was a strategic gambit. They were trying to steal a multi-million-dollar property for the price of a used car. The anger that had been simmering inside me now burned white hot. This wasn't about money. It was about my father's legacy. It was about the man who had seen the storm coming and had built his daughter an ark, not of gopher wood, but of stone and secrets. It was about this small, solid place that had saved me when I had nothing. They thought I was weak. They thought I was ignorant. They thought I was the same broken woman who had walked out of that apartment with 2 suitcases and no future. They were wrong. The cottage had changed me. The hard work had changed me. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I was the keeper of the cornerstone. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I barely ate. I barely slept. I sat with my father's letters and his journal, and I thought about the life I could have with the money. I could buy a nice apartment, travel, start over with a clean slate, financially secure. It was the easy path, the sensible path. But every time I considered it, I felt a deep, wrenching sense of betrayal. I would look at the stone walls, the hearth where I now built a fire every night, the sturdy wooden beams overhead. This place had a soul. It was stitched together with my father's love and foresight. Selling it would be like selling a part of him. Selling it would be like admitting that Mark had won. That his view of the world, where everything has a price tag, where everything is an asset to be leveraged, was the right one. I couldn't do it. My phone rang at exactly 3 o'clock on the second day. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I took a deep breath and answered. Clara, it was Mark's voice. Colder and flatter than I'd ever heard it. Decker tells me you've been unreasonable. Hello, Mark, I said, my own voice calm and steady. It surprised me. I see you found a loophole in our agreement. Clever. I'll admit, my team missed it. So let's cut to the chase. 30,000. That's my final offer. Take it, and you can walk away. I don't want to drag this through the courts, but I will. We'll claim you hid the asset during discovery. It will get messy. It will get expensive. You can't afford to fight me. He was trying to scare me, using the same tactics he'd used during the divorce. But something was different now. I wasn't in his apartment, surrounded by his possessions, living in his world. I was in my house, on my land. I looked out the window at the trees, at the solid, unyielding strength of the woods. It's funny, I said, my voice quiet. You spent 2 years telling me I had no head for business, that I didn't understand the value of things. Clara, don't be sentimental. It's a pile of rocks in the middle of nowhere. Take the money. No, I said. The word felt powerful. Clean. What do you mean, no? He sputtered, his carefully controlled tone finally cracking. What do you want? 50? 100? Don't be greedy. You won't get a better offer. I almost laughed. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought I was just holding out for a higher price. He couldn't conceive of a world where something wasn't for sale. I'm not selling, Mark, I said. Not for any price. This place is mine. Don't be a fool, he yelled, his voice raw with frustration. You can't live there. What are you going to do? Become some sort of hermit? That place is worthless. It's worth more to me than you could ever understand, I replied. The offer is off the table. Not yours. Mine. Don't contact me again. If you or your lawyers set foot on my property, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady. My heart was calm. I had made my choice. The aftermath was quiet. For a few weeks, I expected another car, another lawyer, a flurry of threatening letters. But nothing came. It was a war of silence. They were waiting for me to crack, to run out of money, to give up. But they didn't know about the cash under the floorboards. And they didn't know about the strength I was drawing from this place. I started working on the garden. I spent days clearing the weeds, turning the soil, rebuilding the low stone walls. I walked into town and bought seeds. George at the general store showed me which ones would grow best in the local soil. He started calling me by my first name. I started to feel like a part of the landscape, as permanent as the trees. One day, a woman from the town council came to see me. She was wary at first, explaining that a company called Northwood Holdings had put in a preliminary proposal for a granite quarry. It would bring jobs, she said, but it would change this town forever. A lot of us are worried. They've bought up almost all the land they need. Except for this little piece right in the middle. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. They told us the owner was an out-of-state investor who was eager to sell. But you don't look like an investor. I'm not, I said. And I'm not selling. A slow smile spread across her face. Well now, she said. That is very interesting news. The fight wasn't over. I knew it was just the beginning of a much longer battle. There would be legal challenges, pressure from the company, a long and difficult road ahead. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had my father's letters, his research, and the support of a town that was slowly starting to feel like a community. I had a home, not just a structure, but a real home, a foundation, a cornerstone. I had found my way back to myself in the quiet solitude of these stone walls. I had learned to be self-reliant. I had learned the difference between what I wanted and what I needed. I didn't need Mark's money. I didn't need his approval or his vision of a successful life. I needed this. The feel of the sun on my back as I worked in the garden. The smell of wood smoke from my chimney on a cool evening. The solid, unshakable feeling of the ground beneath my feet. My father had given me more than a cottage. He had given me a second chance. He had given me back my own strength, a strength I had forgotten I possessed. And that was an inheritance worth more than all the granite in the world. So that's my story. Or the beginning of it, anyway. The legal battle with Northwood went on for almost a year, but with the town on my side and my father's meticulous records, they didn't stand a chance. They eventually abandoned the quarry project, and their offers to buy my land got more and more desperate, but my answer was always the same. No, this place is not for sale. It's been 5 years now. The cottage is my home. The garden is thriving. I have electricity and running water, but I still cook on the wood stove sometimes, just to remember. I've learned that home isn't something you buy. It's something you build. Sometimes you have to build it out of the ruins of your old life. Sometimes you have to lay the stones one by one, with your own two hands. The lesson my father left for me in that dusty tin box is one I carry with me every day. A cornerstone isn't about wealth, it's about worth. It's that one, solid, unshakable thing you build your life on. For him, it was this cottage. For me, it's the strength I found here. What's your cornerstone? What's the thing that holds you steady when the world tries to wash you away? I'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below. Let's make this a place where we celebrate the things that can't be bought or sold. And if this story meant something to you, please subscribe and join our community. You are not alone in your fight. We are all builders here.